Hi, everyone. I'm Jeannie Ralston. I'm the editor and co-founder of NextTribe, and it's Thursday night, and so we're going to have another great event where we talk to some more accomplished women who are just going to fascinate and inspire you, I promise. I've just been chatting with them a bit while we're waiting. And I'm going to introduce them in a minute, but can I ask all of you to mute yourselves? And what we're going to do is, as we go along, I'm going to talk to them for a while, and then we're going to open up for questions and comments. And just, you can be writing your questions or comments in the chat, and when it's time for you to talk, I'll ask you to unmute yourself so you can talk directly with our speakers. So we have here Lori Sokol, who's also known as Lori Sokol, which I really like. She's the executive director and editor-in-chief of Women's eNews, and she's an entrepreneur, a scholar, a psychologist. She's done reporting and writing for everybody, and we're here to talk about her new book, She Is Me: How Women Will Save the World. So welcome, Lori.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And we also have, what she brought along with her is Taina Bien-Amie, who is the executive director of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. And she's a longtime activist, and she's profiled in Lori's book. So we'll talk to her also about some of these issues that we'll be discussing about why it's women who are going to have to save the world and how we're going to do it. So we're going to start off. Lori has a little bit to read, a little intro or something, and then we'll get into a conversation about this great issue.
Okay, thank you. I'd be pleased to. I'm reading from my foreword, which for those of you who have read the book or will read the book, part of the book is Memoir. Right? I interviewed 30 women who I know who are highly accomplished and inspiring. But the question was, why am I writing this book? How has patriarchy affected me? And what have I witnessed in terms of what women are capable of achieving? So I start off with my experience as a child. And so I'm not going to read the entire chapter, but I will give you a sense as to my experience growing up under patriarchal control. I'm hearing some sound. I don't know if someone wants to mute.
Oh yeah, was that somebody?
Everyone can mute their.
Yeah, if everyone can mute. I hope it's not me.
Okay. I'm starting at the beginning. When I was 5, I wanted to die. I was lying on the plastic-covered living room couch. It was a 60s thing, wrapping couches and chairs entirely in plastic to prevent the furniture below from showing signs of wear. It also blocked any feelings of warmth or comfort emanating from the soft fabric inside. It was a hot, sweaty summer day. No air conditioners were allowed in the Brooklyn, New York public housing complex where my parents, my older brother, and I shared a small 2-bedroom apartment. One large gray fan stood in the middle of the living room, circulating warm air in one direction. Still, I wrapped my entire body in the blanket. It felt somewhat safer inside a cocoon-like covering, encased, protected. While watching a cartoon on the black and white television set a few feet away, I stopped breathing. I did not move or call out for help, however. Finally, peace, I thought. I gently closed my eyes. The terrorist I lived with was standing no more than 10 feet away in the kitchen. As a father, his temper flared almost daily and spontaneously. The only warning sign was a behavior that was very confusing to others, but for my mother, brother, and me, it was all too familiar. He would stick out his tongue just far enough to protrude outside his mouth, immediately roll it in underneath into a ball, and then harshly bite down on it with his upper teeth. Instantaneously, I responded by turning my back to him in hopes of lessening the pain from the physical blows that followed. He always used his right hand, his fist landing mostly on the left side of my head. Now I'm going to just skip a few paragraphs. Now that I've totally, everyone's probably, oh my God. But I'm here to talk about it, right? And have triumphed over it, so let's remember that. Patriarchy not only befitted him, it engulfed him, providing the ultimate mask to conceal his failings, while justifying his violent outbursts to keep those closest to him diminished. Females, he believed, were secondary citizens, alive only to serve as his punching bag, his doormat. It was a belief my older brother Kevin learned from him all too well. It is not uncommon for physical aggression and antisocial behavior to occur among childhood victims of physical abuse, since they learn to view such behavior as an appropriate means of resolving conflict. So, my brother projected his failures, mounting ones at school and in sports, onto me as well. But he used his left hand as well as his right, pushing me into tables, doors, and chairs, anything with a sharp edge. Shall I continue? Or does everyone need a drink after this?
Yeah,
I do.
Yes. Well, I'm just amazed. I guess I have the question of, and probably everyone, how did you triumph over that? That was just.
Well, I didn't even think of triumph. You know, at that age, we're under complete control, right, of our parents, our family. So it was more about survival, right? It's just surviving day to day is what I hoped for, but there were times where I didn't want to, you know, clearly as a 5-year-old, normally if you stop breathing, you call out for help.
Right.
But I felt that finally I would have peace. So every day was a struggle. Fortunately, as time went on, it was really through my reading. I read about very accomplished, successful women, even in the early days, you know, Pippi Longstocking, for those of you who know the story. I adored her. She was living independently, right, on a deserted island with a monkey among cannibals, and she was able to survive, feed herself, create shelter. She was a hero, or Shiro, you know, for me. And so it was also reading to escape. And then when I was about, I guess 10 or 11, when I entered middle school, I started to write, although I had kept a journal before then, a daily journal, which was as I write my book, my one trusted friend. And I would write, and it was a way of, it's very therapeutic, right? To put your feelings down on paper. And so writing saved me. It saved me in more ways than I can even count, therapeutically, and in so many other ways. It was my private space and my secret friend.
And you've gone on, and I think you say in your book that your experience prompted you to want to help other women. That's like a major driving force.
Yes, as other women helped me,
mm-hmm.
right? So as I got older, other women did help me. It wasn't, well, at the age of 12, Ms. Magazine, Ms. MS
mm-hmm.
came out 1972, and I would devour that magazine. It would arrive monthly. And of course, Gloria Steinem then became my idol. I didn't meet her till years and years later. And of course, she's in my book as well. And she wrote a testimonial for the book, which is also, I want to pinch myself sometimes because I can remember the preteen who idolized who she is and her writing and and her strength. But also in Ms. Magazine, there were these letters to the editor that appeared at the beginning of every edition, right? And I write about this in the book as well. I did not have to know these women personally, these young women, older women, it didn't matter. The fact that it was the first time I felt I wasn't alone in my thinking, that these women were writing letters to the editor about their challenges, obstacles they faced, wanting to be independent, in control of their lives, and how difficult it was for them as well. So I found my tribe, you know, as yes, that's the word, as you put it. And they guided me. And there was also books by Virginia Woolf. A Room of One's Own I read in 10th grade. It spoke to me. So many books written by powerful women. And then when I went into college, I was just fortunate to be at a college where the first women's studies major program started in the United States. Brooklyn College, I happened to go there because I live close by. So in some ways it's difficult and challenging. My life has been growing up. I feel like I've been fortunate in other ways, right? To just happen to be at the college where this program started, and I found myself there in the women's studies program. In so many ways, I feel I've also been fortunate, but we make our own luck, right? And but I've been able to seize opportunities when they presented themselves and continue to, and that's what's got me, to this. Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to talk about the whole subject of women saving the world, because I think a lot of us here believe that. But before we do that, I'd love to hear from you, Taina, about what brought you to your work, where you are working to protect and to prevent and abolish sex trafficking and so forth. So can you tell us just a little bit about your backstory, since you're one of the, if you came in late, Taina is one of the women that Lori interviewed for the book, about women who inspired her and still inspire her. So Taina, what's your background in this?
Well, first, thank you so much, Jeannie, for having me, and everyone here on their little boxes, black and photographic. And I especially wanted to thank Lori. This is such an honor to have been selected as a guest speaker here, when she could have picked so many other of the extraordinary women in her book. But the story of my life's work is when you hear, and the first time I read Lori's introduction, it makes you cry on one hand, which is why I saw some people pick up glasses of wine. But on the other hand, it's a story of the survivors we work with, and not necessarily just survivors of sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, but survivors of gender-based violence. And so when you listen to Lori's stories, and a lot of the women who she features in the book were faced with tremendous vulnerabilities as children, right? Unfortunately, childhood is something many people have to survive, especially girls. When you see that the United Nations estimates that 1 in 3 girls and women will have suffered sexual abuse or battery, etc., in her lifetime. That's a lot, considering the billions of women on this earth. But the way I came to this work, I was fortunate to be in a family who loved me very much. I am a first-generation New Yorker from Haitian parents, and anybody who is familiar, I guess, patriarchy just has different tastes and flavors in different environments, but it's basically the same whether you're surrounded by palm trees or concrete. So my grandmother was a suffragette, and my mother, who immigrated here to the US, so obviously had all of the challenges that immigrant women face, was very, very, she was unusual for her environment as, conservative Catholic Caribbean family, in that she believed in women's empowerment and girls' education, and you shouldn't ever count on a man. And so until the age of 13, my world was a world of women. For me, it was around the kitchen table where all the matriarchs and the aunties and the friends were there talking. They just commanded everything, conversations and everything in families, etc. It was also a time when we would see women who were victims of domestic abuse. And so I started figuring out, they're powerful here in the home, in my small little community around this kitchen table, but outside they are being sexually harassed, they are being battered, they their bosses are slapping them on the behind, and so very early on I became, just like Lori, I'm about Lori's age. And so Our Bodies, Ourselves came out, which I read in one afternoon. I discovered Simone de Beauvoir when I was 17, and everything in between, And I think one of the books, I mean, obviously, The Second Sex was seminal in many feminist swirls, especially our generation. But Against Her Will by Susan Brown Miller was something that really just shook me to the core, and I think that's how I started to become a women's rights activist.
Fabulous, and we're so glad you're doing the work that you are. And I put her the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. I put the link to the website there in chat. So I want to ask you, Lori, when the title is just so fabulous, and especially we were talking earlier, it's a great time to have this conversation after the week we've had with Kamala Harris. And I have to just show everybody my dress. I have Kamala Harris's picture on this dress, which is a dress is called She Rose, and it's by an artist who paints Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Gloria Steinem, who's in the book, Lori's book. But it's just it's a great week for celebrating our power. But why do you think it's up to women, Lori, to save the world now?
Well, we've given men a very long time to try to do it, and it hasn't really worked too well. If you look at history, or look at other countries, when there are more women in government or in parliament, those countries are less apt to go to war. Okay, number one. When you have women, the more women who are on boards of corporations, those corporations are more successful in terms of their bottom line, right? When you give small business loans to women, particularly women of color, they're more apt to pay it back in full and on time. And this is with all the other things that women tend to do, all the other responsibilities in terms of still, of course, the primary responsibility for childcare is that of the woman as well. So these are just some of the things, and these are statistics, these are facts, it's there. Look at with the coronavirus now, and of course this book was written before then, right? But if you look at the coronavirus in those countries that have been more successful, right, at combating it by limiting its spread, by minimizing the virus's effect on those countries' economies, right? They are the woman-led countries, Iceland, right, New Zealand, Thailand, not Thailand, but Thailand, couldn't help myself. And Thailand being so close, right, to China as well, Germany, right? So, and why is that, right? So the leader of New Zealand at the beginning was very honest and factual about this is what our citizens need to do to limit the impact of the virus. She was very clear and spoke about the importance of working as a community. We're all in this together. She even spoke publicly to children about what this means, right? What they need to do, about safety issues, etc. There is less of a sense of ego with women. We're more willing to share, to be more compassionate, to be more empathic, to be introspective, to be sensitive, right? It's not about us and our being leaders. It's more about helping others. Now, it's not to say that boys are not born like this either, right? It's not that girls are born any differently, having the capacity for these traits to exhibit them. But what happens what's the first question a person asks when a woman gives birth? What's the first question?
Boy or girl?
Exactly. And why is that the first question? Because based upon the answer, a whole set of values are attributed to the male versus the female, even from the color of the clothing, which I don't know if you know this, a lot of people don't know this, but it used to be before the 1940s that pink was for boys and blue was for girls. You know that? Most people don't know that.
No.
It was a major New York City department store in the early 50s that wanted to sell more baby clothing, so they switched it. Okay, and these are one of the things that we hold true because we feel there's some organic basis to blue versus pink. There is none. It's all society based. So what's the worst thing you can call a boy, right? Say a girl, right? He throws like a girl, he cries like a girl, right? This is what our culture and so many patriarchal cultures teach boys from a very early age. And this is a problem because then they are not allowed to exhibit normal human emotions like crying, right?
But have we gotten, I thought that, maybe we were getting past that at all, but the way we were raising our boys, or it's just still so hard to shake.
We are, it is moving forward. So just for example, right, we just, the vice presidential candidate was just named a woman of color, right? We had but look what we're fighting against, right? Look who it's the old way of thinking that white men, and just look at masks, the issue of wearing masks during this pandemic, that so many men, too many men refuse to wear them, they said, because it makes them appear weak. And the leaders of our country even said that. Now, what kind of a message does that send? Is weakness, actually, it's the opposite. It takes courage, right? To show that you need help, you need assistance, you need to protect yourself. But this is the way, and it hurts men too, because why do men die earlier from heart attacks and strokes and so forth? Because they're not allowed to display normal human emotions the way it does. They're not allowed to cry, right? So how does it come out? It comes out too often through violence and domestic violence against women. So it all stems from that first question when a baby is born. And we have to think about what that means and why do we ask that? And then what does that mean for us as the boy or girl or then brought up in society and what they're taught? So
it's going to take, at this point, is breaking the patriarchy. I mean, fuck the patriarchy. Is that what it's going to take right now to get past this? Are we still?
Well, we have to work from both ends and in the middle, right? We have to work. I mean, this provides a great opportunity. The pandemic, as horrible as it's been, it also provides opportunities for fathers and mothers to be at home together, right, with their children. So the dads can no longer say, well, I have to go to work and I work 12 hours a day. They're there. And it's a great opportunity for them to display parenting skills to their children. And really, children develop best when they, and have a better view of both males and females and their interactions with them, depending on how they interact with each parent. I'm talking about, a heterosexual families, not, same-sex family, right?
And somebody in your book says she thinks this is our last chance to save the world. Do you believe that? I mean, I forget who said it. Shawnee Hunt, I think.
Swanee Hunt, she was the former ambassador to Austria under President Clinton. And in fact, she's written a couple of books, one about women, how they were impacted in Bosnia, as well as Rwanda, where there was the genocide. Mm-hmm. And when the government was reestablished there, a majority of those in government were women. Mm. And Rwanda has not had a war since then. Okay, so yes, Ambassador Swanee Hunt, she has said that, but I think she may have said it, but a lot of people are feeling it and are concerned about it. Some think that that the Trump administration for the past 4 years or 3.5 years was patriarchy's last stand. We don't know. But what we do know is, I guess what we can project is that if the administration is allowed to serve for 4 more years, it will, the long-term, the depth and the breadth of their control of this country will bring it to a level that will be very difficult to build back up to a true democracy.
Right, right, yeah.
We're not even talking just about only about equality of women and men, which is extremely important, but just to maintain democracy in this country, which affects everybody.
Right, yeah.
Right? Regardless of, you know, sex, race, age, orientation, everything. Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask Taina a question, if you want to unmute yourself, if you can. Taina, you say in the book, you had more than two, but these two particular quotes, I put a Post-it note on. You said that you thought women are the most powerful beings on the planet. I just love that. What's behind that? Why did you say that?
You know, you don't want to have a hierarchy of sexes. I don't know if anybody has read Homo sapiens, but in it, it talks about how there were different Homo sapiens groups throughout in very, very early human history. And we are part of the Homo sapiens sapiens. And the Homo sapiens sapiens destroyed every other Homo sapiens subgroup. And so I always say, and you see that especially in countries like, you know, under the Taliban, is the total, I always say, if we didn't reproduce, they would have also extinguished us, for sure. I mean, you see it in so many different manifestations, right? From female genital mutilation to, I mean, if you see a woman in the Taliban regime, she can't sing in public, she can't show not an ounce of flesh, she can't laugh, she can't do anything, right? She's totally erased. But for her ability to continue the race, she would be annihilated. And so there are various forms of that in different cultures. And so I think that's why we have a tremendous capacity to survive against all odds. And to go beyond sort of what society has told us that we were good for, which was to satisfy men sexually and to bear children. And we've seen how difficult that struggle has been. I think we often forget that it was only 100 years ago that we were allowed the right to vote. I mean, think about that. I mean, it's only been 30 years that domestic violence or sexual violence or rape has been deemed a crime. It was just called, you know, just to quote Gloria Steinem, she says, before that it was called life. I mean, you just had a bad marriage, you know, you were just unlucky, you know, your skirt was too short or you shouldn't have gone to his room. And so it's like pulling teeth, right? So we're all on this evolutionary chain and we're moving on it very, very slowly. And I think now, and we do have a lot of resistance, right? There's not just, I mean, Backlash came out 20 years ago, the book, but especially in my line of work where I work, especially trying to combat the sex trade, the resistance is enormous. Just the wanting to maintain the power and control over women's bodies, as we see in many political and legal debates, is very, very strong. I mean, People magazine today has on its cover the 30-year anniversary of Pretty Woman as a celebration. Meanwhile, there's not one movie in Hollywood that has done more harm to our culture than Pretty Woman. Mainstreaming dehumanization of women, you know, glamorizing male sexual entitlement to women's bodies, paid or unpaid. And so those, I think that the culture that we're all under is really just very, it has incredible benefits, obviously, because now we can talk to each other, we can have this wonderful Zoom, but on the other hand, you know, you always have to follow the money and follow the power. But we have enormous resistance.
And you also say in the book that you wonder aloud, like, why are women so threatening to men? Is it is it because underneath it all we are so powerful? I mean, I don't, like it's a.
Yeah, I think, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not an anthropologist. It is a question that many philosophers have asked, like, at what point did the separation, the hierarchical separation between the men and women started? Nobody knows. Was it the division of labor where hunting and gathering was deemed superior than giving birth and, gardening? Or it's pretty unclear, or who knows? But there is, unfortunately, I mean, we see just with the comments that have just come out in the last 24 hours, like the deep hatred and fear of women. And I think, to go back to Lori's point about changing the harm, going from a harmful culture to a celebratory culture, and saying we're all human beings. We can't. And I have 2 sons, right? You can't raise your sons to dominate and exert control, which is what society is telling them to do. And so, yeah, who knows? But this is still, you go back to the witches of Salem, you go back to chastity belt situations. This has been a struggle of the millennia, but I think, for once, I think the 21st century, if we play our cards right, and if we recognize the resistance to our equality, I think our granddaughters will be in a better place.
Thanks. And there's a quote, I guess it's from Amy Ferris, Lori, she says, "Become the women our mothers long to be." And I love the generational idea of this, almost that like maybe our daughters will become what we're fighting for now. They'll become easily. So I love that whole notion.
I'm glad you brought up, first of all, Amy Ferris, because this book would not have been written without her encouragement. She is one of the 2 people. The other woman is Gloria Steinem, who told me, she said a year and a half ago, we were meeting at her home right before the midterm elections. And I've known her for a while, but she knows somewhat of my background, but not as in depth, but we had a lot of time together, just the 2 of us. And so I told her more. And she just said, "Lori, not only have you survived, but you triumphed. And there's so many other women and girls out there who are going through so many difficult things in their lives. They need to know your story." So what I would like to just read briefly, if you don't mind, I just received a short note from a woman who contacted me on LinkedIn, friended me, and then she read my first chapter and wanted to write to me. So if I could just—
Oh, absolutely.
Takes just a few seconds. Okay. "Lori, thank you for accepting my invitation to connect on LinkedIn. I was very impressed by your life story and no longer feel victimized by the year lost being benched and unemployed. I was at the point of giving up. Everything that I believed and stood for in terms of employment seemed to rush away from me at warp speed. I was wrong. When there is hope and determination, there is always a good solution ahead."
Wow.
And that's why we write, right? That's why we do the work that we do, just to receive even one note like that, to know that your work has made a difference, just brings me to tears. So I think that's what we need to do for each other. What can we do? We have to vote. We have to get people to vote. We have to make sure people vote. Right after, a few months after the 2016 election, I had flown to Kuala Lumpur. I was speaking at, I was an opening keynote speaker at a women's economic empowerment conference. So the entire audience was pretty much lined with women in burqas, right? Because it's a Muslim country. And even though you would think these women wearing burqas would not be strong, independent women. Well, in that country, over 80% of the people vote. And when I wanted to make it clear to them, because they're Muslim, that just because Trump was elected president, that's not who the majority of Americans are. And when I told them that over 50% of American citizens did not vote, they were floored. They couldn't believe it. So now we've all witnessed the results of apathy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we have to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So whoever does become president represents the majority of our citizens and not a small minority.
And I think you say in the book that your eWomen News has a thing called 3 for V. Like you,
it's Women's eNews, Women's eNews.
What did I just say? I'm sorry if I said the wrong thing.
Women's News, but I'll type it here. That's okay. Women'sENews.org.
I'll put the link in there.
And also the executive director and editor-in-chief of Women's eNews, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. We're the only, I'm not the founder, I took over about 5 years ago. We're the only online global nonprofit women's news organization. And we have reporters all over the world in some of the most dangerous parts of the world for women and girls, and we provide original reporting and content. So it's factual, it's transparent, and it's truthful. So what was your question again?
Oh, no, you had the 3 for V. You had that where you.
So that actually came out of my meeting with Gloria Steinem about 2 months before the midterm elections, asking her what, heading up Women's eNews, and since we get a few million hits on our website a year, what I felt like I was in a position, of course, to make a difference. So I always go to Gloria, whether in person or via email. She always responds within 24 hours. That's how amazing she also is. And for advice. And we sat down and she said, you know, the important thing is people have got to vote. So 3 for V was created asking everybody to ask 3 people a day if they're registered to vote, whether it be at work, we were going to the office then, a gym, any kind of social environment, and then to help them find out if they're not registered, where to register. And of course, the midterm elections, many, many, many more people came out to vote. I'm not saying because of that, but this is what so that's where 3 for V came from.
That's great. So we're all of us here. We hear this, and Julia just helpfully put a link there so we can learn more about it, like what questions we need to be asking people we meet, and make sure that we promote that. And I want to talk a little bit about women's governing style, or leadership style, because you talk about it in the book, and because it's on our minds with Kamala Harris being named. But there's a quote from Diane Dillon Ridgely. He says, "Women change the nature of power rather than power changing the nature of women," which I just thought was brilliant. So,
yes, it is brilliant, but it's also, it's simple and it's accurate, right? So studies have shown that women who run for office don't run for office because of their ego and they want more power. It's to make change. Whereas the same studies have shown that men run for office for more power, right? As opposed to help others, right? And that's the difference. And again, beyond these studies, we just need to look at the facts out there. I mean, if nothing less, again, I'll revert back to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Taking positive action meant that the leader of each country had to value humans' lives over their pocketbook, right? For those countries, like the United States, like Brazil, right, like Russia, where leaders were in power because they want to increase their power and want the economy to do well because they also want to be reelected, regardless of how many people get infected and die, it's just it's unbelievable. Now, if you look at, again, we don't have nearly the same number of women-led countries as we have men, so we can't do an exact comparison. Right. But as we do have an increasing number of women running countries, and looking at the results of the pandemic, I mean, what is it that New Zealand now has gone 100 days without a case?
Yeah.
So there we are. And the numbers show one thing, but look at the way they have run their countries since the beginning of the pandemic to make sure that people were secure, protected, were aware, were knowledgeable about what is exactly going on, to be honest with them, to help them. And once you have to build trust, right, with the citizens of your country. When you don't have that, you have nothing. So then you have people questioning, like in this country, is it a hoax? Is it a left-wing, who knows? And people are dying. It's unbelievable. But when you don't have the right and immediate and honest, transparent information being sent out from the leader of your country, you're getting mixed messages or the wrong message completely, then it allows people to take chances and risks that they otherwise would not take. And that's what's resulted in now over 160,000 people in America dying. And the number of cases has risen above 5 million. I mean, this country is above every other country in terms of number of cases. It's because leadership, it has to come from the leader down, right?
Right.
I don't like to say down, but they are in that position.
Yeah.
And it comes from them. And if you have direct, honest, immediate, truthful information, empowering the country's citizens to take responsibility for themselves, for their families, the community, and their country, then they will do it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the leader of New Zealand did, the leader of Iceland, of Taiwan, Germany, etc.
Great point. And Amy Rogers, you have a question. If you want to unmute yourself, I think it's for Taina. So Taina, you have a question coming.
It's kind of a general question, and it goes back to this kind of love affair we have in popular culture with vulnerable women getting rescued by powerful men. And I'm wondering if there's anything comparable on the other side of the scales that, really kind of lifts up and celebrates the value and power of women in a comparable, accessible way that isn't, reading a big book or doing a course of study, but that gets into popular culture in a way that reaches people who get soaked in all the other stuff.
Well, I don't watch a lot of television, but I believe there are a number of television series where women are in positions of power, or fictional presidents, or heads of states, or etc. Or in control of their lives in a meaningful way. And then you have an increasing number of women filmmakers. Of course, not enough. If you follow the organizations, Lori would probably know them better than I would. All the women in film and women in Hollywood. I mean, they're constantly complaining about the limited number of women in decision-making processes in film. But again, I think, especially from where I stand, what my work is about, and I always say, like, this kind of the source of violence against women or discrimination against women is about male sexual access to women's bodies, right? So again, whether you're talking about girl marriage or all forms of sexual assault, sexual harassment, commercial sexual exploitation, the sex trade, stripping, prostitution, etc. Whether it's paid or unpaid, it is about sexual access. And it pays. I mean, it pays. I'm watching right now, painfully so, but this series on Stars called P-Valley, and it's the producer writer is Katori Hall, who was a writer for Orange is the New Black. And it's powerful storytelling in that it's about women in a strip club in the Mississippi Valley. Most of them, except for one, are Black women. And you see the exploitation, the degradation, the dehumanization. And yet the New York Times and every other reviewer celebrated it as female empowerment, as the sex trade being perfectly normal source of employment for women and how strong they were. And my sons were telling me about the latest Cardi B song, which apparently is just purely pornographic. So how do you counterbalance that? And it's about, you have to follow the money, right? So in Russia, for instance, over the years, journalism has become a feminized profession. So 80% of journalists in Russia are women, but the 20% who control the media are all men. And so right away, journalism is one of the lowest paying professions in Russia. And so I think it's the same with Hollywood. Until women aren't the foot soldiers of patriarchy, which many of them are, or women have meaningful decision making, and also with consciousness raising, right? Not just follow what the themes and sort of the paradigms that men have imposed on us, but really think out of the box and think about what equality really means. I don't think we're going to see a change, but it doesn't pay. Like, violence against women pays, sexual access pays, unfortunately. But I do think of all, because I think, I'm a lawyer by training. The coalition does primarily legal advocacy work. And although, we're inching towards having strong laws that end violence and discrimination or hold perpetrators accountable, we're losing on the cultural front tremendously.
Thank you. I mean, that's a lot to unpack, and I really appreciate that, because I wasn't aware until you mentioned the pretty woman thing, how that just permeates it all. And I've got a lot to think about there. Thanks.
And I'm always astonished by hearing people put prostitution, whatever, as female empowerment. I mean, I can't, that my brain does not absorb that. It rejects that automatically. And it's just so hard to stomach that. But, and what do you say to that, Taina, if people say it's female empowerment, if they want to do that and make money?
Well, that's unfortunately the mantra that we're hearing more and more, that prostitution is work like any other job. When in fact, what's really surprising is now we're having a national, even global conversation on the legacy of colonialism and institutions of slavery and racism and a little bit of sexism, not so much, but a little bit. And yet you have this multi-billion-dollar global sex trade whose bedrock is misogyny and racism and legacy of colonialism, et cetera. And yet they're getting a pass, right? Everybody's getting fired left and right for Me Too or whatever, but if the same sexual harasser or violator gives her $50, then hey, it's okay, we're not touching it, it's her choice, her empowerment. When in fact, if you look at their lives, I mean, going back to Lori's story, Lori could have been someone who would be extremely vulnerable to a pimp or a trafficker, right? So you don't have love at home, you go seek it somewhere else, and pimps and traffickers smell that. They smell vulnerability a mile away. And so when we talk about the what happens to women who are in prostitution, sort of their histories of childhood sexual abuse, homelessness, if they're trans, of being kicked out. I mean, the list goes on. It's acute vulnerabilities that feed into the global trade. And the other thing that people don't talk about is the International Labor Organization estimates that profits from sex trafficking amount to $99 billion a year, which is an extremely modest amount for a number of reasons I won't go into. But people don't say that every single one of those dollars come from sex buyers, like every single one of those dollars. And so that's not something that society is willing to address right now, unfortunately.
And also, if I can add, the Super Bowl,
Sure.
the annual Super Bowl, is the largest sporting event to attract sex traffickers and victims of sex trafficking.
You mean at the actual event? There's just
So they do a whole weekend, a whole week leading into it and so forth. Yes, it is the biggest event to attract victims of sex trafficking. I mean, it's all part of, it's like a package that they buy into along with the tickets to the game. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're running it. Well, we have a little bit more time, and I want to ask you, Lori. So, talking to all these fabulous women, what are some of the characteristics and qualities that they share? I mean,
Good question, because some people said to me, well, you had to find 30 women. And I said, actually, it was hard to narrow down to 30 women. But I wanted to make sure that each woman I interviewed, I knew, all right? I knew they were those that possess the traits that are more effective, have been shown to be more effective in saving lives, families, communities, and the planet. The traits that we spoke about, right? Empathy, compassion, honesty, introspection, sensitivity, etc. These are the traits in patriarchal cultural societies that are viewed as weak, right? And soft, and they're feminine, and who wants, but actually it's the opposite. So every woman I interviewed here, I already knew, and I knew they were the real deal, that they possess those traits. Some I just knew for maybe a year, others I knew for a dozen years, and everything in between. I also wanted to have a vast cross-section of women. There's one woman who is from Somaliland, right, in Africa, who built her own hospital in her name. She was a victim of FGM. So she built a hospital to teach nurses, right? And to teach people how FGM is wrong, and the number of lives that she has saved by doing that is just tremendous, right? I interviewed, one, Sarah Ferguson, the former Duchess of York. You wouldn't think she would be in the book, but we had about 15 years ago, a great conversation about the importance of being oneself despite what others say about you. I mean, we talk about women being victimized, now Kamala Harris, and we know Hillary, just two examples, victimized by the media about the way they look, the way they talk. She's too ambitious, her ankles are too fat, I don't know. Well, we know that, and that's just the beginning. Well, we know that, if you remember Duchess of York, they called her Duchess of Pork. They just totally took her apart. But our conversation was based upon the fact that she had learned to find a sense of self within herself, to eventually not allow those who comment about her negatively to impact her. So that was a source of strength. I thought it was important to convey as well. All of these women are compassionate in that the success and the issues that they are working on, it's to help others, right? It's all about helping others. It's not about their ego, their identity, their brand, okay?
But we can say that they do have ego, right? So it's okay to have an ego, but
ego is acceptable, but they're not doing this work, right, to build their brand.
Right.
They're doing this work, Taina is an excellent example, doing this work to help other women, to save lives, right? There are so many women in this book. Amy Ferris, will go back to her. She has, through holding writing workshops for people to expose themselves, to share their secrets, right? That they're afraid to share before. How empowering is that? There are so many women. Lima Bowie, Nobel Peace Prize recipient, who led the uprising in Liberia, right? To get the president out of there, who was sending kids, girls and boys to war. And she said each chapter starts with a quote. After interviewing each of these women, there's a quote that I feel is so strong and represents them so honestly. That's how I start off the book. And for her, she said, when you realize death is better than life, you have nothing to lose. And that's what brought her to gather all these women to go to the government there, and they threatened to take off their clothes, which is a sin, to take off their clothes in public if the men who headed the government did not listen to them. I mean, that is amazing.
It is. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So Liberia, and again, so from all parts of the world, women involved in a variety of different aspects where they are helping other women, communities, countries, the planet, etc. And also women representing a variety of ages and races and sexual orientations and religions. I mean, socioeconomic status, because the point is to show that she is me, right? We are all her, okay? We are all her. We all have those traits inside of us. So if they can do it, we can do it as well.
And I love that you mentioned that Gloria Steinem gave you a blurb, and it says, "She is me takes us from personal to global," which I really like.
And when I share my personal stories with people, they trust themselves to share their stories with me. And that is very, very special, because some of these women are, you know, they're famous, they are traveling all over the world. They don't really have time, but to take a lot of time. But I found that when you're really honest and purposeful and share in a very generous way, people respond. And that's, whether it be interviewing people for this book or being a leader of a country and doing the same thing, right, to your country's citizens, it's the same traits, the same qualities that enable people to respond in a positive, supportive way, not only for themselves, but for others.
And so when do you think we'll have a female leader? I mean, we're a step closer for sure, but.
Well, I hope it's in my lifetime. You know,
Yeah.
It's just outrageous that so many other countries look at us and they say, what is the problem? Why don't you have a female leader? And that's not to say also that a female leader will, you know, it will be the end all, that will have all the right qualities and do all the right things. It's not to say that a male leader will do all the wrong things, right?
Right.
We have Canada, Justin Trudeau, right, who is a self-described feminist, right, who when he selected his cabinet, half were women, and reporters asked, why are half women? He says it's, you know, 2000, I don't know what year it was, 2019 or 2018. I mean, it's ridiculous. Other countries look at us and say, as progressive as other countries or think we are, we're actually not at all. And we're witnessing, right, the pushback from the white patriarchal supremacy trying to hold on to power, right, and entitlement over others that they're desperately trying to, you know, maintain. The world has changed, and this country is changing. And they're going to try all they can, but eventually they're not going to be able to. We just want it to be sooner rather than later.
And I like your description of the Trump administration as patriarchy's last stand. Whoever, you know, I'm hoping that, right?
Well, it's actually, it's for the betterment of everybody, not just women, right? Not just the LGBT community. It's better for men. Many of them just don't know it yet.
Right, yeah.
And
well, I hope everyone will go out and you can get Lori's book on Amazon, and she also put her website up there. Is it sheisme.com or wait?
No, it's sheismebook.com. And if you want to avoid the fees that go to Amazon, and they're not really doing anything with that money to help anyone, so go to sheismebook.com. You can avoid all of that, and you will then also receive a signed.
Oh, nice, wonderful. And so I hope we will all do that. And I want to also tell people that NextTribe, I was telling Lori and Taina about this, but we are trying to do more, become more activist in ways. And so we're having a meeting on next Wednesday where we're taking on sexism and ageism, the intersection there, because it's a huge thing. So, and that's on our events page where you've learned about this event. So, and I'll also be sending an email out to you. But I want to thank you, Lori. It's so great after we met that one time in the terrible rain, but I'm so glad you come on, and congratulations on your book. And Taina, thank you for coming. It was wonderful to have you and to learn about your work. It's so inspiring, really. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. And for anyone who reads the book, you will know that I do compare Taina to Camilla Harris.
Yes.
I don't know if that's going to get more people to buy the book, but and that was months ago.
Yes,
so
you're prescient.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
stay healthy, everyone.
Thanks to all of you who came. I appreciate it. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.